Today I'm talking about the causes of the Industrial Revolution in America. Of course, you've heard about the Industrial Revolution in global studies. This is geared specifically toward the United States and U.S. history. We're going to start with British textile inventions reaching America. This, of course, has to do with the weaving of cloth. The first factories would be in New England for a couple of reasons. First, because water power from the rivers, there are a lot of rivers in that area, would provide the power for the machinery, as well as proximity to seaports, which would make it easy to transport the goods. Eli Whitney later invents the cotton gin, and of course that really creates conditions in the South where they began mass producing of cotton. Also, unfortunately, it led to an increase in the need for slaves. The War of 1812, a bit later, is going to prompt Americans to manufacture their own goods because they're not able to get these goods any longer from Great Britain, which was one of our largest trading partners. And also, America has abundant natural resources. We are a vast country with a lot of resources that will be used to fuel this Industrial Revolution. Some new forms of technology that will be part of this process include the telegraph, which was invented by Samuel Morse in 1844. That's going to improve communication. You've probably all heard of Morse code, which is that series of dots and dashes, and those would be sent via an electrical signal, basically, that would be sent from one place to another. Another innovation is interchangeable parts. Eli Whitney first used this idea in rifles, actually, during the War of 1812, and the rifles could be taken apart, and the parts, it would be made to an exact standard, and they could be interchanged with matching parts from another machine. So this was a big innovation. This meant that you didn't have to rebuild or remake the whole machine. You could just replace a part that didn't work or was damaged. Some economic factors that will lend to the Industrial Revolution include banks. Banks will be able to lend money to entrepreneurs. And again, that's another word you remember from global studies. These are people who take the risks of starting a new business. There's also going to be a large pool of investment capital, and people will spend that money in hopes of future gain. Also, we're going to see the rise of corporations, which consist of selling shares of stock to raise capital for new businesses. Effects of the Industrial Revolution will include the birth of a market economy here in the United States. This is essentially a capitalist economic system. It depends on buying and selling goods based on supply and demand. It depends on privately owned businesses in competition with each other. Also, it often includes the borrowing of money to finance new businesses or upgrades in machinery and technology in an existing business, as well as paid labor that produce goods in factories. As part of this, we're also going to see a middle class that emerges. And as part of that middle class, women are increasingly confined to homes. It is their sole job to take care of the home, to take care of the children, to take care of the husband, basically. We're also going to see an increase in urbanization, the growing cities, and they're going to face problems. And again, this is something you learned about in global studies, problems with crime, sanitation, issues like that, as well as tenements and overcrowding. And then immigration is another effect. People are going to come here to provide the labor that these factories are going to need. In this slide, you're looking at a graphic, at a map, actually two maps that are showing you the growth of cities, the urbanization in the country between 1820 and between 1860, right before the start of the Civil War. And so you can see how large cities have emerged. And if you look at the circles and then look at the key, you're going to see how large these cities are. You look at Buffalo and the map on the right, it is a city of 50,000 to 100,000 people. It wasn't even on the map on the left. I think many of you realize that the growth of Buffalo had a lot to do with the Erie Canal, which we'll be talking about in a minute. The Industrial Revolution goes hand in hand with a transportation revolution that included four main aspects. One is canals, man-made bodies of water that usually link lakes or lakes to rivers or something to that effect. The Erie Canal would be the most prominent of those, especially in this area. That's completed in 1825. Steamboats and steamships, those are going to be able to use steam to power across lakes, to power against the current even in rivers. So steamboats, you'll see a lot of the Mississippi, steamships throughout the Great Lakes, railroads or locomotives beginning in the 1830s, and new roads will be built. Many of those are called turnpikes or toll roads because there was a pike across the road that would need to be lifted once you paid your payment or fee in order for you to proceed on the road. And those roads were generally at the time in the early 1800s built by private investors or states. This map, of course, is showing the Erie Canal system in New York State, and you can see a lot of different cities and towns that grew up along the canal. Of course, Buffalo, and you see Lockport, Rochester. Some of these existed as small towns or villages before, but definitely increased because of their proximity on the canal. This map, as it states, shows principal roads and waterways around 1840. You're going to see the Erie Canal, of course. You're going to see also a series of roads that were built in the early 1800s, and all of this is going to help to improve transportation between east and west, and even north and south for that matter. Now, effects of the transportation revolution include connecting markets in the east with western farmlands, and that's going to lead to lower food prices in the east as well as the growth of the west. You're also going to see western migration increase. Settlers who have run out of ample land in the north and east, or even in the south for that matter, will move west, as well as immigrants coming from mainly Europe. And you're going to see lower shipping costs. So there are going to be stronger economic ties between the regions, between east and west, between north and south even. One of the earliest factory systems was the Lowell Mills in what's now Lowell, Massachusetts, and a man named Lowell built a textile factory in 1822 in Massachusetts, and that really expanded from there. Most of the people working there were teenage girls who had come from farms. Later, you would have a lot of Irish immigrants, but still mainly young women working there, and they found this appealing because there was financial independence that this afforded them. They did work long hours, about 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. The working conditions could be very poor, very cold in the winter, very hot and sweltering in the summer. They lived in company-owned boarding houses, and their behavior was very much regulated. There was a code of conduct and many different rules that they had to follow in these boarding houses that were owned by the company, by the textile mills that they worked for. These Lowell mills actually provided some of the first labor resistance in the United States, and that is because in 1834 wages were cut, as well as the company's share of the board, of basically the rent that the girls had to pay. This was basically cutting their pay about 20%, which was a pretty big deal to them. So many workers went on strike. Most of them ended up returning to work with no concessions. There were no changes. The wages continued to be slashed, and not much was accomplished. In 1836, they went on strike again. Again, this was unsuccessful. Later, in the next decade, in the 1840s, a woman named Sarah Bagley, who had worked at the mills, led efforts, to organize labor and resistance at that point as well. So it just didn't really take off too much. They didn't really get what they wanted, these women, but it was definitely a step in the right direction toward labor rights. The graphic you're seeing here, the picture you're seeing here on the right, is called the Lowell Offering. It was a book of essays and literature by the girls that worked at the mills. And it became a very important part of kind of the culture of the women at the mills.